When the bank called my name instead of hers, I knew something was terribly wrong. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind that feels forgettable until it changes your whole life. I was at work, halfway through my second cup of coffee, when my phone began to buzz. The number on the screen looked official. Long, unfamiliar, almost intimidating. "Ms. Lewis?" a crisp voice asked. "This is Sandra from Fairway Credit Union. We're calling regarding your business loan account." For a moment, I thought they had the wrong person. "What loan?" I asked, frowning, pressing the phone tighter to my ear. "The loan you co-signed with Ms. Erin Dale. The payment has been overdue for 60 days. As her guarantor, we'll need you to bring the account current or face collection proceedings." That name, Erin Dale, hit me like a slap. My best friend. My sister in everything but blood. I didn't even hear the rest of what the woman was saying. My heart was pounding too loudly. Erin had promised me, sworn even, that it was a small startup loan. Safe, she'd said. Just some paperwork to make the bank comfortable. I was only supposed to be a name on the dotted line. Now that name was being dragged through mud I hadn't even seen coming. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, the office noise around me fading into a blur, the smell of burnt coffee, the hum of the printer, the clicking of keyboards. None of it reached me. All I could think was, how could she do this? Before all of this, Erin was my person. We met in high school, two awkward girls sitting in the back of a dusty art class, pretending we weren't nervous about everything. She had this laugh, loud and contagious, the kind that made teachers sigh and everyone else smile. I was quieter, more cautious, but Erin had a way of making the world feel a little less sharp. We grew up together. College roommates, bridesmaids for each other, godmothers to each other's children. We'd been through everything. Heartbreaks, bad jobs, the long nights of crying over men who weren't worth the mascara. When she divorced her husband 3 years ago, she stayed with me for a month. We'd sit on my porch, wine glasses in hand, making promises about the future. She talked about starting her own business, a boutique design studio. She was talented too, creative, driven, with a natural gift for making things beautiful. So when she came to me one evening, eyes red from crying, papers in her hand, saying she needed a co-signer, I didn't hesitate. She said the bank needed a little more stability on the application. Her credit had taken a hit after the divorce. "It's just a formality," she said. "I'll never let it fall on you, you know that." And I believed her. Because that's what we do for best friends, don't we? We trust, we show up. We sign the line. I remember that night vividly. We were at my kitchen table, a warm lamp casting a golden light, my son asleep upstairs. Erin sat across from me, her hands trembling slightly as she passed me the pen. "You don't have to do this if you're not comfortable," she said, almost whispering. I smiled. "Erin, you'd do it for me." Her eyes softened, and she said, "You're my family, Mia. I'll make you proud. You'll see." We laughed, hugged, and sealed it with a promise of dinner to celebrate when her business took off. I remember thinking how good it felt to help her, to be part of her comeback story. For months afterward, everything seemed fine. She'd send me photos of her office, swatches of fabric, even selfies with her first few clients. I'd proudly tell people, "That's my best friend. She started her own design business." It felt like both of us were finally winning at life. Then, little things started to change. She stopped answering my calls as quickly. Her texts became shorter, vaguer. I noticed she'd stopped posting updates about her studio. When I asked, she said things were just busy. I believed her again, because that's what I'd always done, until that call from the bank. That night, I went home, pulled out the old loan paperwork, and reread it under the dim light of my living room. The words blurred. My own signature stared back at me, neat, confident, trusting. Somewhere between the pages, I found her signature too. Erin Dale, the woman who once cried on my couch after her ex left her, the woman who held my hand when my mother died, and now, the woman who'd just left me holding her debt. I called her again that night, once, twice, 10 times. No answer. Her voicemail still had that same bright tone. "Hey, it's Erin. Leave me something good." I didn't leave anything, because there were no good words left. The next morning, I drove to her office, the one she'd shown me pictures of months ago. The sign outside was gone. The windows were papered over. Inside, through the cracks, I could see empty desks, a few scattered boxes, dust in the sunlight. It looked like someone had packed up in a hurry. I asked the neighboring store owner what had happened. "Oh, that lady? Moved out about 3 months ago," he said casually. "Said she was heading to Arizona. Something about starting fresh." My stomach dropped. Arizona? That was halfway across the country. That was running. I went home that night feeling like I'd been hit by a storm I never saw coming. Every corner of my house held traces of her. Photos, gifts, memories. I stared at the picture on my fridge. Erin and me, arms around each other, laughing with wine glasses in hand. And all I could think was, how do you stop loving someone who betrays you this deeply? I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, watching the clock tick from hour to hour, replaying every conversation, every smile, every "you can trust me." By dawn, I'd made up my mind. If she could disappear with my name on her debt, I could find her with it too, because this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about dignity. About not being the fool she thought I was. Sometimes betrayal doesn't begin with a scream. It begins with silence. The kind that feels like it's hiding something. After that sleepless night, I started making calls. The kind of calls you make when you don't know if you're angry or just heartbroken. I called the bank first. They confirmed what I already feared. 3 months of missed payments. A total of $4,600 still due. They said they'd already tried contacting Erin, but her number was disconnected. Her email bounced back. They even sent letters, all returned, stamped address unknown. That phrase, address unknown, felt like a knife. Because Erin had never been unknown to me. For 15 years, I'd known her better than anyone, or so I thought. The first thing I did was visit her apartment. It was a small 2-bedroom unit she rented on Pine Avenue. Warm, cozy, filled with plants and art supplies. I remembered helping her move in after the divorce, but when I arrived, the door was wide open. Inside, the air smelled stale, like old paper and dust. The walls were bare. Even the picture frames were gone. I looked around slowly, half expecting to hear her humming from the kitchen, that soft tune she always sang when she was anxious. But the only sound was the faint creak of the floorboards beneath my shoes. Her mail slot overflowed with unopened envelopes, mostly bills. I crouched down and saw one with a red stamp, final notice. A neighbor, an older woman watering her plants, peeked her head out. "Are you looking for Erin?" she asked. "Yes," I said quickly, standing up. "Do you know where she went?" The woman shook her head. "No, dear. She left in a hurry. A man with a moving truck came one morning, and by evening she was gone. Didn't say goodbye to anyone," I asked, and she said she got a new opportunity. She seemed nervous. "Nervous?" I repeated. "Yes," the woman said softly, lowering her voice. She looked like someone running from something. That night, I sat in my car outside Erin's empty apartment complex, staring at the lights flickering in other people's windows. Families eating dinner, a couple arguing quietly on a balcony, life moving on, while mine felt like it had stopped. I scrolled through my old messages with Erin, months of voice notes, photos, emojis, laughter. And then I noticed something strange. About 2 weeks before the bank's first missed payment, her messages suddenly changed. Shorter, rushed, filled with, "We'll talk soon," busy with clients, crazy days, and then nothing. That was 3 months ago. I started digging through everything I had. Receipts, old emails, shared documents from her business. The company name she registered was ED Design Studio LLC. I typed it into a business directory online. The result hit me like a cold splash of water. So, not only had she shut it down quietly, she'd done it before she even disappeared. That's when I realized something. Erin hadn't fallen into trouble. She'd planned her escape. I started replaying our last few conversations in my head. One in particular stood out. It was a Sunday afternoon. I'd called to check in. She'd answered after the fourth ring, her voice sharp, impatient. "Mia, can we talk later?" "I'm in the middle of something important." "Is everything okay?" I'd asked, a little hurt. Yeah, just clients, deadlines. You know how it is." She'd sounded distant, almost irritated. I remember laughing nervously and saying, "Don't forget, we're meeting for lunch next week." She paused. "Right. Lunch. Yeah, if I'm still around." I thought she meant busy, not gone. That line haunted me for weeks later. If I'm still around. I'm not someone who understands finance deeply, but I had to learn fast. I called a lawyer, a family friend, Martin. He was kind, but his words didn't comfort me. "Mia," he said, flipping through the papers, "when you co-sign, you become fully responsible if the borrower defaults. The bank doesn't care who used the money, just that it's unpaid. So I'm stuck with her debt?" I asked, feeling my voice shake. "Legally, yes, unless you can find her and prove fraud or get her to pay. But that's not easy, especially if she's left the state." I swallowed hard. "What if I find her?" He gave me a look. "Then we'll talk." I went home that evening and sat at my dining table, the same one where she'd made me sign that cursed paper. I laid out every piece of evidence I had. The loan documents, her dissolved business registration, her last known address, old selfies with location tags, receipts with store names and timestamps. Then, I opened her social media accounts, the ones she barely used anymore. Her Instagram was private now, her Facebook was untouched for months, but her old Pinterest? Still public. And there it was. A clue. A few new pins from weeks ago. Desert decor, Arizona sunsets, small business licenses in Phoenix. Phoenix. The neighbor had said Arizona. She was there. When you realize someone you loved lied to your face, it's not a clean pain. It's messy. It twists around memories, poisons them slowly. I thought about all the times I'd lent her money. $50 here, $100 there, never once asking for it back. I remembered her birthday last year, when I surprised her with a new sketchbook and she cried, saying, "Why no one ever believes in me the way you do, Mia." And all this time she'd been building a new life on my name. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. She'd taken my trust and used it like a stepping stone, climbing her way out of her problems while pushing me into them. The next week was a blur of phone calls and panic. The bank gave me 30 days before collections would begin. 30 days before my credit, the one thing I'd worked years to protect, would collapse. My family tried to help, but no one could reach her. Even her parents said they hadn't spoken to her in months. "She sends postcards sometimes," her mother said quietly. "But no address. I asked to see one. It was from Sedona, Arizona. Just mountains and red rocks. Signed only, Love E." I took a photo of it, thanked her mother, and drove home with tears I didn't even realize were falling. That night, I made a decision. I was going to find her. Not for vengeance, not even for the money, but because I needed her to see me, to face what she'd done. I wanted her to look me in the eyes and admit it. That she used me, that she left me, that she turned friendship into debt. I took 2 weeks off work, told my boss I needed personal time, packed a suitcase, filled my car with gas, and set off early one Saturday morning. I'd never driven that far alone before, across states, through miles of desert and silence. But something about that empty road felt fitting. I'd trusted her with everything. Now I was chasing the ghost of that trust across the country. Somewhere between Nevada and Arizona, the sun began to set, painting the horizon with gold and blood-orange streaks. I remember whispering to myself, "She can't run forever." When I finally reached Phoenix, it was late evening. The air was warm, heavy with the smell of dust and gasoline. I checked into a cheap motel, sat on the bed, and opened my laptop. I searched every business directory, social media tag, and local registry for Aaron Dale. Then I found it. A small listing. ED Interiors. Owner, Aaron D. Location, Scottsdale, AZ. She hadn't just disappeared. She'd rebuilt her business, under a slightly changed name. New start. Same initials and the address. Less than 20 minutes from where I was sitting. I stared at the screen for a long time, my hands trembling slightly. Somewhere out there, under the same sunset, Erin was living her new life, while I was counting the days until my credit died. It wasn't about justice anymore. It was survival, and the next morning I decided to pay her a visit, not as a friend, but as the woman she'd left to drown. You can forgive a thief for stealing your money, but not for stealing your peace. I didn't sleep much that night in the Scottsdale motel. The air conditioner rattled in the corner, blowing lukewarm air that smelled faintly of dust and detergent. My laptop screen glowed on the nightstand, still showing that cursed listing, ED Interiors, owner, Erin D., my Erin, my best friend. My betrayer. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight, each second dragging like a heartbeat I couldn't calm. I tried to imagine her. Maybe sitting in some polished studio, sipping coffee, smiling at new clients, her laughter echoing off white walls. And all I could think was, she built it with my name. My credit, my trust. By dawn I was dressed, hair tied back, hands trembling slightly as I typed the address into my GPS. 21 minutes away. The longest 21 minutes of my life. The city woke around me as I drove. Sunlight spilling over desert hills, palm trees swaying against the sky, joggers and shopkeepers beginning their day. It looked so peaceful, so normal. But inside me, a storm brewed. I kept whispering to myself, just stay calm, Mia. You're not here to fight. You just need answers. Still, my heart didn't listen. When I turned onto the street listed in the business directory, I almost didn't recognize it. It wasn't some corporate area. It was a quiet stretch of road lined with converted homes turned into small offices. And there, between a yoga studio and a bakery, was the sign that made my stomach drop. Same initials, same taste. Even the logo looked familiar, almost identical to her old one back home. I parked across the street and just sat there, watching. The door opened, and there she was. Erin. Her hair was shorter now, darker too. But her walk, her posture, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. I'd have known her anywhere. She was holding a clipboard, smiling as she greeted a couple walking in. It hit me like a punch. She looked happy, unbothered, like she hadn't left someone across the country drowning in debt. I didn't go in right away. I sat there for almost an hour, watching people come and go. She laughed, chatted, gestured, a businesswoman in control of her world. Meanwhile, my hands shook around the coffee cup that had gone cold. When the last client left and she locked the door, I finally stepped out of the car. My legs felt heavy, my heart louder than the traffic. I crossed the street. Erin. She froze. Her keys slipped from her hand, hitting the pavement with a sharp clink. When she turned, I saw every emotion cross her face, shock, guilt, panic, before she masked it with that same old smile. Mia? She said, voice trembling slightly. Oh my God, what are you— I cut her off. Don't. The word came out sharper than I expected. She swallowed, eyes darting toward the empty street. Let's maybe go inside? I followed her in. The studio smelled of fresh paint and lavender candles. Everything was arranged beautifully. Minimalist, serene, perfect. And suddenly I realized this was where my loan money had gone. Not into some failing business. Not into debts or emergencies. Into this perfection. We stood in silence for a moment before she spoke. I can explain, she said finally, her voice breaking a little. Please let me explain. Explain what? I said quietly. That you disappeared? That you left me with $48,000 in debt while you started over here? Her eyes filled with tears. It wasn't supposed to be like that. I didn't mean for you to get dragged in. You didn't mean? I interrupted, my voice trembling now. Erin, you begged me to co-sign for you. You swore I'd never have to pay a cent. You said we were family. I know, she whispered. I know I did. Then why, Erin? Why would you do this? She sat down on one of the cream-colored chairs, her hands covering her face. After the divorce, everything just fell apart. I couldn't get clients. The studio back home. It was bleeding. Money. I panicked. The bank kept calling. I thought if I could just move somewhere new, start fresh, I could make it work again. I didn't mean to leave you behind. Her words hung in the air like smoke. You didn't mean to? I repeated. Aaron, you didn't just leave. You hid. You changed your number, your address, your business name. You lied to me. She looked up, her eyes red. I was ashamed, Mia. I didn't know how to face you. I told myself I'd pay it off quietly once things took off here. I laughed bitterly. Well, congratulations. Looks like things did take off, while I've been dealing with collection threats. She flinched, her voice breaking. Please don't hate me. Hate you? I whispered. Aaron, I mourned you. I thought something happened to you. I called your mother. I drove across states. You didn't just betray me. You made me grieve you. She sobbed quietly. I know. I'm sorry. I stared at her. Really stared. This woman sitting in front of me wasn't the same Erin I'd once called my sister. She looked older, haunted, like she'd been running from her own shadow. But sympathy and anger don't live well together. They tear you apart in opposite directions. I pulled a folded envelope from my bag, the collection notice. I placed it on her spotless white desk. That's what the bank thinks of your fresh start. They'll come after me next. She glanced at it, tears spilling down her cheeks. How much do I owe? You mean we owe, I said sharply. 48,000. But the difference is, you still have your life, your business. I have a signature and a deadline. She pressed her trembling hands against her mouth. I can give you something now. Not all of it, but some. Please, let me fix this. I shook my head slowly. You can't fix this with money. Not entirely. She looked confused. Then what do you want? I looked her straight in the eyes. The truth, on paper. I want you to sign a confession stating that the loan was yours, not mine. That I co-signed out of trust. I want it notarized. That way, if the bank sues, I have proof you're responsible. Her face went pale. Mia, that could ruin me. I took a deep breath. So did you. She hesitated for a long moment, staring at the paper. Then quietly she nodded. Okay. I'll do it. Her voice was almost a whisper, the sound of surrender. The next day, we went to a notary office. She signed every word, hands trembling. I watched, silent, my heart heavy. The notary asked if we were sisters. Neither of us answered. When we stepped outside, the Arizona sun was blinding. Erin stood there for a moment, looking lost. Mia, she said softly, you don't know how much I regret all this. I turned to her, my voice low. Then prove it. Start repaying. The bank doesn't want tears, Erin. They want money. She nodded. I'll wire you the first amount tonight. I promise. I didn't reply, because I'd learned something about promises. They're just words until backed by action. That evening, back in the motel, I checked my account. There it was, a deposit of $5,000 from Erin. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Still, the ache didn't fade. Finding her hadn't brought peace, just clarity. I realized the betrayal wasn't just financial. It was personal, intimate, the kind that changes the shape of how you trust people forever. Over the next few weeks, we stayed in touch. Carefully. Formally. She sent small payments every month. I updated the bank. Slowly, painfully, the debt began to shrink. But our friendship? That was gone. Some things you can't rebuild, no matter how many zeros are added to a transfer. One night, months later, she called unexpectedly. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. Mia, she said, I just wanted to say thank you for not destroying me when you could have. I didn't know what to say. She went on. I live with guilt every day. I lost the best friend I ever had. I hope someday you'll forgive me. There was a long pause before I answered. I already did, I said quietly. But forgiveness isn't friendship. Some bridges don't burn. They just stop leading anywhere. She cried silently on the other end. You were my sister. I was, I said softly. And you were mine. Then I hung up. That night, I stood outside my home, back in California, staring at the dark sky. The air was cold, crisp, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Because I'd found the truth. And sometimes, that's all you can ask for. The morning after Erin signed the confession, I sat in my motel room staring at the notarized paper on the desk. Her handwriting looked small, uncertain, nothing like the confident looping signature I remembered from years of friendship. It said, I, Erin Dale, acknowledge full financial responsibility for the Fairway Credit Union business loan co-signed by Mia Lewis. I accept that Mia Lewis was not a beneficiary of this loan and is not responsible for repayment. That one sheet of paper was my proof. My safety net, my line between ruin and survival. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was grief. It's strange how betrayal feels like a death, not of a person, but of the version of them you used to love. The next day I called Fairway Credit Union. My voice was steady, but my hands trembled. Ms. Lewis, we're still waiting for payment, the woman on the other end said firmly. I have documentation, I told her, trying to sound calm. A signed and notarized statement from the borrower admitting full responsibility. There was a pause. That's unusual. Can you send it to our legal department? I already did, I said, and I'll be expecting a response in writing. It wasn't the kind of tone I usually used with anyone, but something had changed in me, a hardness maybe, a quiet authority born from pain. 2 weeks later, I got a letter confirming what I'd hoped. The bank had agreed to shift the liability back to Erin. They'd pursue her for the debt directly. When I read those words, I cried. Not loud, dramatic. Tears, just quiet, exhausted ones that fell onto my kitchen table as I whispered, "It's over." But it wasn't, not really. Because closure isn't a letter in the mail. It's a slow healing that takes root inside you. For the next few months, I focused on rebuilding what the ordeal had broken. My credit report slowly improved. The threatening calls stopped. The sleepless nights became fewer. But the biggest change was in how I saw the world and myself. I used to think trust was about always saying yes, being the dependable one, the soft place for others to land. But now I knew. Trust also means protecting your own peace. I started setting boundaries, small at first, saying no when I didn't have the energy, asking questions before helping, learning to pause before signing anything, even emotionally. People around me noticed the difference. My sister said, "You sound stronger, Mia." I smiled and said, "I just learned to stop mistaking guilt for generosity." Months later, I got another call, this time from a journalist. "Ms. Lewis? I'm writing a story about a local interior designer named Erin Dale. Her business is under investigation for financial misconduct. Your name came up in connection with her loan documents." I went silent for a moment. "I don't want to be part of your article," I said carefully, "but I hope the truth comes out." Local designer accused of fraudulent business practices. The article said multiple clients had filed complaints, unpaid vendors, bounced checks, unfinished projects. Her picture was there too. Erin, standing in front of her showroom, smiling faintly. The comments online were merciless. But I didn't feel joy. "Not really," It's easy to think justice will taste sweet, but when it's someone you once loved, it just tastes like ashes. 3 months after the article, I got a text. Aaron, can we talk? Please, just once. I need to see you. I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it. Another part, the human part, still wanted to understand. We met at a small cafe halfway between our cities. When she walked in, she looked nothing like the woman I'd confronted months ago. Her hair was dull, her eyes tired, her clothes loose. Mia, she said softly, sitting down. You look good. I nodded. You don't. She gave a sad laugh. That's fair. For a while, neither of us spoke. The sound of clinking cups filled the silence. Then she said, Everything's gone. The business, the clients, even my savings. I just wanted you to know, I'm paying the bank. Every cent. It'll take years, but I'll do it. I looked at her, the woman who'd once been my closest friend, now reduced to regret and ruin. Aaron, I said quietly, I don't want your apology anymore. I just want you to be someone I can remember kindly again, even if it's from far away. She nodded, eyes glistening. You always were kinder than I deserved. No, I said softly. I just learned where kindness ends and self-respect begins. We finished our coffee in silence. When she stood to leave, she hesitated, then whispered, You saved me from myself, you know. I didn't reply. Because sometimes silence says enough. That was the last time I ever saw her. Months turned into a year. Seasons passed. Life, somehow, began to feel ordinary again. I repainted my kitchen, the same table where she'd once made me sign the loan papers. I replaced it with a new one, lighter wood, softer corners. I started journaling again, small entries about my days, my feelings, my growth. It helped. Writing always did. One night, I found an old photo of us, 2 young women in messy aprons, holding glasses of wine, grinning at the camera. I didn't tear it up. I didn't throw it away. I just looked at it for a long time and whispered, Thank you for teaching me the cost of blind love. Then I put it back in the box. Not to forget, but to let it rest. A year later, I opened a small consultancy of my own, helping women navigate small business finances. It started with just one client, a single mother trying to apply for a microloan. She told me, I'm scared to sign anything. I don't understand the fine print. I smiled softly. I used to be scared too. Let's go through it together. And as I watched her eyes fill with relief, I realized this was my closure. Turning my pain into purpose. Turning a betrayal into guidance. One morning, I received an envelope in the mail from Fairway Credit Union. My heart skipped. Old instincts. Inside was a simple letter. Account paid in full. Attached was a receipt with Aaron's final payment. No note. No signature. Just numbers. Proof that she'd kept her word in the end. I sat at my desk, holding that paper. I didn't cry this time. I just smiled. Because maybe, in some small way, we'd both paid our debts. Hers in dollars, mine in lessons. People often ask me now, would you still co-sign for a friend? And I tell them, yes, but only for the kind of friend who'd co-sign for me. Because that's the truth, isn't it? Trust isn't about how much we're willing to give. It's about knowing who deserves it. That night, as the house grew quiet and the city lights blinked outside my window, I wrote one last journal entry. I lost money, yes, but I gained something richer. Boundaries, wisdom, and peace. And sometimes, peace is the most expensive thing you'll ever earn. The truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just stands still while lies crumble on their own. When the bank sent that paid-in-full letter, I thought that was the end of my story. But life has a way of showing you that closure isn't always private. Sometimes, the truth you kept hidden in your heart finds its way into the open, whether you want it to or not. It started small, a conversation overheard at my office, two colleagues whispering over coffee. Did you hear about that designer from Arizona? One said. Yeah, the other replied. The one who ran a scam under her friend's name? Terrible. I froze mid-step. They didn't know it was me, the friend in that story. My throat tightened, but I didn't say anything. I just walked back to my desk, quietly, trying to process the strange feeling in my chest. Not pride, not shame, just the surreal realization that the world had finally caught up to what I'd lived through in silence. A few weeks later, the story appeared again, this time in a popular women's entrepreneurship podcast. The host said, "Today's episode is about trust, paperwork, and the dangers of mixing friendship with finances. We'll discuss the case of an interior designer who fled with a business loan co-signed by her best friend, and how that friend turned her pain into empowerment." My hands shook as I listened. I didn't give them permission to tell my story, but I knew exactly who had Erin, because near the end, the host said softly, in a statement, the designer, identified as ED, admitted her actions destroyed not only her business, but her closest friendship. She said, if I could undo it, I would, but the woman I hurt taught me what accountability looks like. I pressed pause. And for the first time, instead of anger, I felt gratitude. Erin was finally taking ownership, publicly. Not through a courtroom or a confession forced by me, but through her own choice. That's when I realized she wasn't just repaying her financial debt. She was repaying her moral one, too. People around me began to notice the shift. Neighbors I'd known for years would stop me in the grocery store. I heard a story on the radio, reminded me of something you went through. You must be so strong. That word used to sound like pressure. Now it felt like truth, because strength isn't loud. It's not the kind that shouts or fights. It's the kind that keeps standing, quietly, even when the ground beneath you cracks. A few months later, something unexpected happened. I received an email from a local community center inviting me to speak at their Women in Finance seminar. They wrote, "We believe your experience could help others learn the importance of financial literacy, boundaries, and emotional resilience." At first, I hesitated. I wasn't a public speaker. I was just a woman who'd made a painful mistake. But then I remembered how lost I'd felt during those dark months, and how many others might be silently drowning in the same kind of trust. So I said yes. The community hall was small, filled with about 30 women, young professionals, single mothers, retirees. I stood at the front, a microphone in my hand, heart pounding. The host introduced me as Mia Lewis, business consultant and survivor of financial betrayal. The word survivor made me smile faintly. When I began speaking, my voice shook at first. "I'm not here to tell you not to trust people," I said. "I'm here to tell you to trust wisely." Then I told my story, not every detail, but enough. How a friend I loved had asked me to co-sign a loan, how she'd vanished, how I'd been left with the debt, and how, in chasing her down, I ended up finding myself. The room was silent. You could hear the hum of the old ceiling fan. When I finished, there was a long pause, and then applause. Not loud or dramatic, gentle, respectful. Afterward, a young woman came up to me with tears in her eyes. "My sister's going through something similar," she said softly. "I didn't know how to help her until now." I hugged her, because in that moment I realized my pain had turned into someone else's map. The story kept spreading. A small article was written about the seminar. Then another local magazine published a feature titled, "From Betrayal to Boundaries: How One Woman Rebuilt Her Life After a Financial Fallout." I didn't ask for fame. I didn't want sympathy. But somehow, my experience became a mirror for others. A quiet reminder that financial betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes, it wears the face of someone who once held your secrets. A few months after that, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, unmarked. The handwriting stopped me cold. "Erin. Mia, I heard your interview. I read the articles. You handled everything with grace I didn't deserve. I wanted to thank you for showing the world the truth. not through hate, but through dignity. I'm rebuilding, little by little. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday, when people mention my name, it won't sting you anymore. I read that letter 3 times, then folded it gently and placed it in my journal. Not to reopen old wounds, but to mark the day I finally felt them close. That evening, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection. I thought about all the versions of me that had existed through this journey. The trusting friend, the betrayed woman, the angry avenger, the cautious survivor, and now, the teacher. Each version had its scars, but they were all mine. For the first time in years, I didn't see failure in my eyes. I saw wisdom, the kind that costs you dearly, but pays back in strength. A year later, someone sent me a social media link. Erin had started a small nonprofit, Restorations. Its mission: helping women rebuild credit after financial abuse or co-signing losses. I scrolled through her page. She'd written a post that said, "I once hurt someone who trusted me with everything. That betrayal taught me what real responsibility looks like. Today, I help others who made the same mistakes, both victims and perpetrators, find their way back." I didn't comment or message her, but I sat there smiling quietly, not out of pride, not even forgiveness, but peace. Because sometimes, redemption doesn't happen in your presence. It happens when you've both learned enough to walk different paths toward the same light. Months later, during a local fair, an older woman came up to me. "You're Mia, right? The lady from the story?" I nodded, a little embarrassed. She smiled warmly. "You make me believe people can change, both the hurt and the hurter." "Thank you." That night, as I walked home through the quiet streets, I thought about her words. Maybe that was the real victory. Not proving Erin wrong, but proving myself right. Right for surviving, right for growing, right for still believing that goodness can return, even after it's been broken. On the anniversary of the day the loan had first been approved, exactly 3 years later, I visited my mother's old garden. I planted a new rose bush, a single white one, white for forgiveness, thorns for memory. As I pressed the soil down around its roots, I whispered, "It's done now, Mom. It's all finally done." The wind blew softly, carrying the scent of roses and earth. And in that stillness I felt her, or maybe just peace itself, saying back, "You did well." Outwardly, my life looked like a comeback story, but inwardly it was quieter, simpler. I wasn't chasing success or recognition. I just wanted balance. I'd stopped seeing myself as the woman who got betrayed. Now I was the woman who learned, endured, and chose grace instead of bitterness. And that, more than any public sympathy or applause, was the real consequence. The kind that doesn't fade with gossip or time. Justice isn't about watching someone fall. It's about learning to stand taller in the shadow they left. Healing doesn't announce itself. It comes quietly, one peaceful morning, when you realize the past no longer hurts like it used to. A year had passed since I last heard from Erin. Sometimes, when I think about it, it feels like a lifetime ago. Other times, like it happened yesterday. But here's the thing no one tells you. Healing isn't a straight road. It's a winding path that loops through memories, regrets, and quiet revelations. Some days I'd feel invincible, full of gratitude and wisdom. Other days I'd still wake up with a heaviness I couldn't name. And yet, every morning I'd wake up anyway. That was progress. After everything that happened, I made a promise to myself. No more rescuing people who would let me drown. It sounds harsh, but it wasn't. It was necessary. For so long, I'd built my identity around being the helper, the dependable friend, the one people called when their lives fell apart. Erin wasn't the first I'd saved, but she was the last to make me pay for it, so I began rebuilding my heart differently, with boundaries, not walls. I joined a local women's circle, not as a mentor or leader this time, but as just another woman learning how to trust again. We met every Friday evening in the back of a small bookstore, a mismatched group of teachers, mothers, and dreamers. We'd sip herbal tea, light a candle, and talk about everything from family drama to the quiet fears we never say out loud. It was strange at first, sitting in a room full of strangers and saying, "Hi, I'm Mia. I co-signed a loan for my best friend," and she disappeared. But the silence that followed wasn't judgment. It was empathy. One woman squeezed my hand and said, "You're not alone. I signed for my brother. He vanished too." We both laughed. That kind of soft, broken laughter that says, "I see you." And in those small, shared confessions, something inside me began to mend. For years, I had been the giver of money, time, forgiveness. So when people offered me kindness, I didn't know what to do with it. One of the women in the group, Clara, became a close friend. She had this way of listening, not with pity, but with patience. One evening, after I'd helped her write a grant proposal for her art studio, she surprised me with a painting. It was small, abstract, strokes of blue and gold swirling together. On the back, she'd written, "For the woman who turned pain into light. I cried when I saw it." Not because of the words, but because for the first time in years, someone had given me something, without asking for anything in return. That painting still hangs in my living room. Every time I look at it, I remember that healing isn't just about forgiving others. It's about letting love back in, safely, slowly, sincerely. One night, I found myself flipping through an old journal, the one I kept before everything went wrong. There were pages full of plans with Erin's name in them. Launch her business together, trip to Napa next spring, save for joint project, all of it. Gone. So I turned to a fresh page and wrote a letter to the woman I used to be. The trusting, hopeful version of me who signed that loan. Dear younger me, you weren't naive. You were kind. You didn't fail. You simply believed in someone who couldn't carry that belief. But look at you now. Stronger, wiser, softer in all the right ways. Don't stop loving. Just love with open eyes. Don't stop giving. Just give without losing yourself. You didn't lose a friend. You shed a weight that wasn't yours to bear. Love, the woman you became. When I finished, I felt lighter. Like I'd finally closed a conversation I didn't realize I'd been having with myself for years. A few months later, life surprised me. It came in the form of a man named Daniel. He was a quiet accountant I met through the community workshop. I wasn't looking for love. In fact, I'd made peace with being alone. But Daniel was patient, gentle. He didn't try to fix me. He just stood beside me while I healed. Our first real conversation happened after a session where I spoke about forgiveness. He walked me to my car afterward, hands in his pockets, and said, "You know, sometimes forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about not wanting to carry their mistakes in your heart anymore." Something about the way he said it, steady, simple, made me pause. Over the next few months, we started seeing each other more often. He'd bring me coffee during long workdays, or show up at my talks just to listen quietly in the back. He never asked about Erin directly, but one night he said softly, "You must have loved her very much." I did, I admitted, and I think in some way I still do. Not the person she became, but the person I believed she was. He nodded slowly. Then maybe that love wasn't wasted. Maybe it just changed form. That's when I realized healing doesn't mean erasing love. It means learning to let it exist without pain. A year after our last contact, Erin reached out one final time. An email. Simple. Honest. "Mia, I wanted to tell you. I'm leaving the city. Moving to Oregon to start over again. This time, honestly. I paid my last penalty, closed my accounts, and ended the nonprofit so I could join a new one that focuses on credit repair education. I'm sorry for how long it took me to grow up. You were right about everything. I'll never expect a reply, but I needed to thank you. Not just for the loan, but for the lesson. I learned what real strength looks like by watching you survive me. Erin." I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because some stories deserve to end in silence. Forgiveness had already happened in the space between us. It didn't need words anymore. I archived the email, then closed my laptop, walked outside, and watched the evening sky shift from pink to indigo. Somewhere out there, she was starting over again. And I genuinely wished her well. That was the day I realized I had truly let go. 2 years later, the Women's Center offered me a permanent position, leading a mentorship program for women recovering from financial or emotional betrayal. We called it the Second Signature. The idea was simple: to help women learn how to sign their names again, not on loans or contracts, but on their own futures. Every week, I sat in that little circle with women who carried the same stories of lost money, lost trust, lost love. And every week I reminded them, you didn't fail. You just learned the hard way what loyalty should never cost. Watching their faces soften, seeing them begin to believe in themselves again, that was my real healing. Because teaching others how to rise helped me realize I already had. One Sunday, Daniel and I were sitting on the porch, sipping tea. The sun had just started warming the day, and birds were singing somewhere near the oak tree. He reached over, took my hand, and said, "You know what I think?" "What?" I smiled. "That you're finally free." I looked at him, really looked. His kind eyes, his calm energy, the way he said it without any hint of pity. I smiled softly. "Yeah," I whispered. "I think I am." A few weeks later, I revisited the little garden where I'd planted that white rose bush. It had grown taller, fuller, blossoms opening to the sun. I knelt beside it, touching one of the petals. It was so soft, it almost felt unreal. And then I realized something. The rose wasn't perfect. Its leaves had been eaten by tiny insects. Its thorns were sharper than ever. But it was alive, beautiful despite the scars. So was I whispered to the wind. "Thank you, Aaron, for the lesson, not the loss." Because the truth is, every betrayal is just an invitation to meet the stronger version of yourself waiting on the other side. It's quiet now. Quieter than it's been in years. Some mornings I sit by the kitchen window, watching sunlight spill across the same table that once held a mountain of unpaid bills, loan notices, and my tears. Now it just holds my cup of tea and peace. There's something sacred about ordinary mornings after long storms. The kettle whistling, the hum of the fridge, the smell of toast. They don't sound like much, but to me they sound like freedom, because once I thought I'd never have this calm again. I thought betrayal was a life sentence, something you carry forever like a scar that never fades. But I learned something different. Scars don't fade. They just stop hurting when you finally stop touching them. It didn't happen dramatically. There was no music, no sunset moment of revelation. It was a Tuesday, plain and forgettable. I was cleaning out my desk at the Women's Center when I found that old envelope from the bank, the one that once made my hands shake. This time I didn't even flinch. I just smiled, tucked it back into a folder labeled Past Lessons, and whispered to myself, "You did it." That's when I realized I wasn't angry anymore, not at her, not at myself, not even at the world for letting it happen. Because maybe healing doesn't come from closure. Maybe it comes from compassion, for the person you were when you didn't know better. The community center has become my second home now. On the wall, there's a photo from our very first second signature class, 20 women holding up blank sheets of paper. The symbolism was simple, a new signature, a new start. Some of those women came to us broken, the way I once was. One had been betrayed by her sister. Another had signed a joint mortgage with her boyfriend, who left the country before the first payment. Every face told a story, and every story somehow found its way back to the same lesson, that losing money hurts. But losing trust hurts deeper. During one of our sessions, a woman named Teresa asked me, "Do you ever wish you'd never met her? Your friend?" I smiled softly and said, "No. Because without her, I'd still be the woman who said yes to everything and everyone, except myself." That answer stayed with me long after class ended. Because it was true, love changes after betrayal. Not just romantic love, All love. You learn to weigh your words before you promise. You learn to look for consistency instead of charm. And most importantly, you learn that love without boundaries isn't love. It's sacrifice. Daniel, the man who came into my life quietly and never tried to fix me, still reminds me of that. He loves differently, softly, steadily, with no grand declarations, no fireworks, just peace. Some nights, when I'm lost in thought, he'll reach for my hand and say, "You still go far away sometimes." I nod. "Yeah, I still visit the past." He smiles and replies, "As long as you don't unpack your bags there." That always makes me laugh. Because that's the kind of love I needed. One that doesn't erase my history, but makes space for it. People talk about forgiveness like it's a switch you flip. But it's not. It's a long, slow thaw after a long, hard winter. Forgiveness felt different for me. It wasn't one big moment. It was 1,000 small ones. It was seeing Erin's name in my email inbox and not feeling my chest tighten. It was hearing her voice in that podcast, admitting her wrongs, and realizing I didn't want revenge anymore. It was walking into a bank to help another woman fill out her first loan form, and not trembling at the memory of my own signature. Forgiveness wasn't for Erin. It was for me. Because I was tired of carrying her in my story as the villain. So I let her go. Not with anger, not with bitterness. Just with quiet acceptance. And maybe that's the purest kind of forgiveness there is. Every month, I visit that garden behind my house, the one with the white rose bush I planted after everything ended. The first time I planted it, it was just a symbol of hope, of rebirth, of letting go. Now, it's become something else entirely. It's a reminder that beauty can grow from the ugliest soil. Sometimes I trim the thorns, sometimes I let them be, because both are part of what makes the rose whole. One morning, I noticed a small bird had built its nest inside the bush. It felt poetic, life making home inside something that once represented pain. That's how healing works, too. It doesn't erase the past. It builds new life inside it. A few months ago, one of the volunteers at our center handed me a magazine. "Look who's in here," she said, smiling. It was a feature about community credit repair programs around the country. And there she was, Erin Dale, listed as one of the coordinators of a new initiative in Oregon. I stared at her photo for a long time. She looked different, older, humbled, but peaceful. The article quoted her. "I made mistakes that hurt someone I loved deeply. Now I dedicate my work to ensuring no woman ever signs something she doesn't fully understand." I don't know if fate has a sense of irony or mercy, but seeing that filled me with quiet gratitude, because even if we'll never speak again, knowing she turned her darkness into light makes my forgiveness feel complete. She found redemption in her own way, and I found mine in letting her. A few months ago, a young journalist asked to interview me for a piece titled "The Cost of Trust." She asked, "If you could go back to that moment, the day your best friend asked you to co-sign, would you still do it?" I thought about that for a long time. Finally, I said, "Yes." Because even though it broke me for a while, it built me forever. She looked confused. "You'd still sign?" I smiled. Maybe not the paper, but I'd still believe in her, because belief isn't the mistake. Blindness is. She wrote that down quietly. Later, when the article came out, it ended with my quote in bold letters. "Pain taught me what contracts couldn't, that the signature that matters most is the one you write on your own boundaries." Last month, I gave a closing speech at our annual Women's Empowerment Conference. Hundreds of faces looked up at me. Some young, some older, all carrying the kind of silent strength I recognized. I began softly. I used to think my story was about betrayal, but now I know it's about becoming. Then I told them everything, not the details, but the heart of it. How trust can blind you, how love can wound you, and how forgiveness can free you. I said, "We all sign things in life. contracts, promises, friendships. But remember, the most important signature is the one you write with your actions every day. That's your real name. Protect it. When I finished, there was silence. Then applause. But the best part wasn't the sound. It was seeing women nodding, eyes glistening, as if they'd just recognized their own strength reflected back at them. That moment felt like the perfect full circle. The teacher becoming the healed student, and the healed student becoming a guide. I don't measure life in money anymore, not in loans or debts or balances. I measure it in peace. And peace, I've learned, is not cheap. It costs you your pride, your bitterness, your need to be right. But when you finally pay that price, it gives you something priceless. The ability to breathe again without resentment. If I could tell the woman I was 5 years ago one thing, it would be this. One day you'll thank her for leaving, because she gave you back to yourself. And I do. Every single day. Now, if you're listening to this story, maybe you're sitting in your car, maybe folding laundry, maybe just trying to make sense of your own heartbreak, I want to talk to you. I know what it feels like to be betrayed. To have someone you trusted twist your faith into their advantage. To wake up one morning and realize the person you'd have sworn would never hurt you already has. But please listen closely. You will survive it. Not by pretending it didn't hurt. Not by getting revenge, but by reclaiming yourself, one decision at a time. Drink your tea slowly again. Say no without explaining. Smile without fear. And when you finally sleep peacefully, know that's your victory. Because survival doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it just looks like rest. It's been years now. Erin is somewhere out there, living her new life. I'm here, living mine. Our paths don't cross anymore. They don't need to. We both became women who learned from our mistakes, and maybe that's enough. Sometimes when I look at the sky just before sunset, I think of her. Not with anger, not even with sadness, but with a quiet sort of gratitude. She taught me the hardest lesson of all. That love without honesty is debt, and forgiveness without growth is wasted. Would you have done what I did? Would you have chased her down, forced the truth, and demanded justice? Or would you have walked away, kept your silence, and chosen peace instead? Tell me in the comments, my dear friends. Because maybe your answer will help another heart still deciding which road to take. And before you go, if my story reminded you of your own, if it helped you breathe a little easier tonight, then stay. Subscribe. Because here, in this little corner of the world, we share stories not to reopen wounds, but to remind each other how to heal. Until next time. I'm Mia, and this was my truth. Sometimes the people who break you are the same ones who lead you back to yourself.